Okay, all right. So my head's a little clearer now, baby. A couple things I dropped along the way. I wanted to make very clear. This is from feedback from people saying, can you clarify a couple things? What is bank money? Bank money is money in the bank, which is not as, you know, strictly speaking, it's not money. It's not like money in your pocket. Money in your pocket, a dollar bill in your pocket, quarter in your pocket is an asset that you own, and it has no counterparty. And its validity, its use value is guaranteed by the state. Money in the bank, it is functionally the same in a checking account, in a current account. But it's actually you left your money, you lend your money to the bank, you've given it to the bank, and it's when you see it in your bank account, it's the bank's IOU to you. It's not quite the same as money. Up to a certain point, it's guaranteed by the state that it can't disappear, that they can't lose it. But functionally, it's not. You're lending it to them uh, at interest. In a commercial bank, a retail bank, there's very strict rules, so they don't actually deduct your money to lend it to someone else. There's a debt architecture, there's a calculation about how much X number of deposits allow for, can be treated as a certain kind of asset for the purposes of leveraging it, but it doesn't disappear from your account, obviously, when it's lent to someone else. But it's in a certain status that it's ready money, effectively. And in a checking account, you don't get interest. You might even have to pay, but basically, you're lending it to them in exchange for the service of their, being the custodian of it, moving it around for you. If you kept it in cash under your bed, it would, could be, you have a flood and there it goes. So, bank money just is money. That's not, um, you know, when Vighi was saying, "Oh, he doesn't want the ruling class didn't want the money to get into the real economy," that statement is itself nonsense. It means nothing, but it's an effort to connote something or to suggest something that that you're supposed to think it means. Um, think it means in order for you to take responsibility for the text, because if at some point he would say, "Well, there's no such thing as or whatever." Sorry, that was the wrong way to say it. But it's making the reader or the listener take responsibility for making sense of a text that is nonsense, but it approximates sense. It's a very, these are professional tactics that you learn in PR, marketing. So what he means when he says the real economy is money in the bank, in banks, or also, it might go through a cash, a stage as cash, but almost all the money that's in the economy is sitting in a bank. When you buy something, it moves from one bank to another normally, without even going through cash, although some of it goes through cash, through a phase of being moved from here to there. You take it out of the wall and give it to someone else, puts it back in the wall. Okay, so that was one thing I wanted to make sure I clarified. And the contrast, the point of of his saying this is that you're supposed to understand when he says that the money is going to be made, but it's not going to be in the real economy, means that it's not going to be in the account. It's not going to be bank money. It's not going to be in the current accounts or savings accounts in commercial banks. It's going to, in 2006, that what is being created is reserves reserve money, in the Federal Reserve Bank. That is the required reserves of banks for banks to then go create money. And I hope everybody knows how money gets created, basically, is by lending. It's created by debt. You go to your bank, you want to buy a house, and you take a mortgage, and the mortgage is money that's created by your bank on their keyboards. They pay for the house, and so the seller of the house then gets this money that they just created in their bank account, and you get the house, the deed to the house, and then you also create this instrument of debt, which the bank either owns that created it, or it's already sold it on to investors if it's collateralized, etc. So, okay, so money, that's the money in the so-called the real money in the real economy. Okay, so I wanted to, and in relation to that, I want to explain the difference between 2006 and the CARES Act. And the 2006, what was created, what the bailouts did, and with all these different mechanisms, TARP, which was designed as one thing, and they actually never did that. They never did the toxic asset thing, and most of it was to create. They had this enormous. It was the Treasury, right? The Fed is doing one thing, but the Treasury is actually bailing out. There's this Treasury money, tax money, is bailing out the banks. Is being loaned to the banks from the U.S. Treasury, and most of the, huge part of the scam is there were commissions on but because of the Patriot Act, all of these things could be completely secret, and they were designed to be secret in the TARP Act as well. So in the Patriot Act, any government contractor can keep its contract and all the terms of its contract and everything about it secret, so that the bank that was handling the TARP money, the distribution of the TARP money, I think it was J.P. Morgan. Might have been Bank of New York Mellon, but I think it was it's Bank of New York Mellon. They got commission, that is the secret, on all this on the bailouts. So it was creating an enormous sort of invisible fund, some money that was had been the taxpayers' money that went to a government contractor bank, with a specific staff of people to deal with it, that then it's that kind of thing that you realize they were making a financial weapon. Somebody wants that money, but it's so much money, it's the government money, and all of a sudden nobody has to answer for it. This is the kind of money that can be used to, to be a financial weapon in, where it's okay, it's okay to lose that money if you need to do that for your scam, if you need to tank some bonds or something like that, you'll have this fund that nobody owns. No one can ever find out. There's no shareholders to answer to. They created, with a lot of these bailouts, that's one of the things that they've been creating, are these funds in a funny state of ownership. I mean, technically they go to the bank that carries them out and the bank's shareholders, but everything's secret, even from the shareholders, because of the Patriot Act. So anyway, I discussed that long ago as it was happening on a common sections of all the blogs that were arguing about TARP and the last time around, but a lot of it disappeared from the web, unfortunately, because there was a lot of details, including archives of all the press at the time, which is really very interesting to go back and look at, knowing now that that was the precursor to what just happened, we can see a lot even more clearly. And also how, that people were stupid then. Not people. People are smart. People know what's going on. The clerks are pretending to be as stupid, and then they have a few, you know, useful idiots that they wrangle. But for the most part, the professional comment is as willfully naive, malignantly naive as it was then, in the same way. But anyway, so what they did in 2006 is effectively, besides all this jiggery-pokery outside of this, which was probably the more important thing, but the banks were theoretically also insolvent or on the verge, or they weren't passing these stress tests, or it was all made up in a lot of cases. But what the government did was coordinate with the Fed to create Fed Reserve for the banks to make them more solvent. So they have the same liabilities, but now they have more assets. More liquid assets. They took they did a whole bunch of different things to achieve this. One of them being the quantitative easing, which is the Federal Reserve buying assets that are low yielding and not super liquid from the banks, so that the banks can have cash, but really they're just parking the asset at the Fed. They're making capital liquid that's not liquid. It's a magic trick that makes the capital that isn't liquid very liquid. So and one of the things that's happening with this is the capital, can be in many, many places at once now. So let me first say the main contrast is they made the reserves to make the banks more liquid and more solvent, more solid. And these were the banks that were going to gobble up the other banks. And they had hoped, it was obvious that they had hoped to knock over a lot of regional banks with the CDOs. But in fact, they were unable to really tank the CDOs. They were much more stable and liquid as well, selling like hotcakes than they had wanted them to be. They didn't really blow up. So and the regional banks have been run with a lot more probity than than the schemers had hoped. And this is the Bush regime, and with Paulson and that whole clique. So they, it was a little bit fucked up, just like 9/11. They managed to, achieve their aims mostly, but they fucked it up a little, and so everyone could see what was going on too. But the thing about the money printing though was that it was done in a way that would stabilize the banks and it not be that inflationary. Because it was sort of taking these not so liquid assets off the table, some of which were actually quite liquid. It's like they went through the motions because that was the plan. So they took these assets and put them in the closet of the Fed, and the banks wound up with the cash that they hadn't had, but that it was the equivalent of their assets, and so they stabilized the bank. Now with the CARES Act and the things that followed up on this, it was the exact opposite. They didn't make reserves on the Fed accounts, the bank's accounts at the Fed. They didn't make that. They made deposits in the bank. They gave the money to private entities that weren't banks, to businesses and hedge funds and large financial players that hold the money in commercial banks, so that the same kind of what looks like the same thing, it's a bailout, they're giving money to the ruling class again, but they did it in a way to make the banks less solvent, because deposits are a liability, not an asset. So, again, in 2006, they created money for the banks in such a way that would make the banks more solvent, more stable. And then now what they did was they created money again in a way that made the banks less solvent. And of course, they're less solvent on paper, but they're not actually less functionally solvent. So all the banks can function as they were functioning before. But the program, this plot, has given the opportunity to the regulators to go and close down whichever banks they want. They're going to close them. They're going to sell them really cheap to the other banks. It's part of the ongoing consolidation of the banks. So, of course, the banks that they're going to close, first, all the shares have to be sold to the working class and the middle classes, to the pensions and the mutual funds, because that's going to be the losing party. Then the deposits are all going to be guaranteed. And then a regulator, the banks, these banks that were closed didn't go to the regulator and ask, didn't go to the government, to the court, and ask for bankruptcy protection. They're not bankrupt. They were solvent, functioning fine, as much as any other. I mean, some are a little underwater, some are not. But it's easy if the government and the Fed just give, your big client, in your bank is this hedge fund, just give them another $1 billion to put in your banks and you're insolvent. That's how it works. So, while your assets are tanked from the other part of the scam, the raising of the interest rates. So, you're insolvent while you're actually rich. You're functioning. It's just it's a bit of an illusion. So, but it's so the regulator just declared that they had to the hedge funds or the private equity and all a run was started on that bank, SVB, to give some reality to this sense of the insolvency. But in fact, it's probable that everyone would have, even if every single person took their money out, that there would have been money to pay them. But we'll never know. So that's the scam now. So the first one is they were making banks very solid and enabling them to take over the banks that they had managed to knock over with all the things they did in from 2001 to 2006. And then this thing is the opposite. What they're doing is the opposite. They're making a slew of banks, so, all the regional banks. They're trying to make all the regional banks insolvent on paper so they can take the ones they want for now. And of course, there's other effects of that. Okay, so that was related, sort of, to this thing with Vighi. Okay, so like Vighi, the story, you don't have any idea. When you read him, you have no idea what's going on. You just have this there's this kind of Jeremiah, there's this kind of rant about, that's all moralistic and psychologizing. Our economy and people and the rich are addicted to credit, right? We're addicted to credit. But the way he portrays this addiction has nothing to do with the actual addiction to credit, as John Titus would explain, that you actually need to keep borrowing in order to pay your obligations. For him, it's like, oh no, it's literally like a gambling addiction. People just, all they want to do is borrow more money to buy more assets, to inflate with the borrowed money in a circle that is just being driven by an endless appetite for creating speculative bubbles on the stock market or in real estate, when in fact, that's not possible. Like to create a situation like there is, you have to have real political pressures. There have to be real levers. You can't just rely on euphoria and greed or emotional, bad attitudes and terrible personalities because people are too diverse. So, then the winners in those scenarios would be people with different personalities, which always exists. So, it's a fantasy. It's a moralizing hysteria in the style of Bifo. You see that he takes a lot from that, which is better known in Italy, but it's pretty well known in the U.S. too. So in the style of Bifo, this sort of like ranting about how, consumer society, and it's very typical sort of fascist, but often kind of soft fascist, anti-consumerist complaints. Like the Rancière dissected this very well in his Hatred of Democracy book. But that kind of thing, and it's not. It doesn't explain anything about what's really happening and why they're actually, what the danger is if how you can have a so-called liquidity crisis, and what would result if there was no solution found. So it's not that at all. So what he's trying to do is give you a different, not to leave you less aware of what's happening, with less understanding of the forces at play, but also, the situations they're in. That's the thing. Like, they want to portray the ruling class as simply magical and able to do whatever it wants. So without showing, why banks, that banks can actually, on the one hand, there's this idea that, they wake up one day and they're insolvent and the bank has collapsed, like a building fell down. And then at the same time, he's trying to convince you that all the people who run this bank are magical and can do whatever they want. And the reason the bank fell down is because of their frenzy. They are in a frenzy of greed and addiction. They're junkies. They're credit junkies. So it's obviously, if this is your vision of what's wrong, then your whole politics, your political response is going to be something completely different than if you have a basic grasp of what the problem is. That what's actually happening with the banks. Because of course, if we had democracy, and even could get the left of what used to be the left of Congress, not even that long ago, not ancient history, in my lifetime, would be able to fix this. You have to levy back you'd have to levy back the ill-gotten heist money, and you'd have to tax the rich, and then it would actually could put all this back in place. It's really not it's not a storm. There's not an earthquake inevitable under this whole system. But the thing is, you'd have to be proceeding in a socialist direction. You'd have to accept that the end game is the destruction and the dispossession of the ruling class. And if you're on that path, even within a sort of social democracy, you could fix the current banking problems. It's not that complicated, but you have to accept that there's not going to be any more capitalist profit. Now that's already over, and that's the origin of all of everything that's happening is the contradictions in capital itself, the social relation that is capital. It's the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, and the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. Oh, right, and the fact that capital is the product of the political struggles that leaves this fungible relation, a fungible property claim that ties everything together. That the ruling class's praxis is hamstrung by it, is controlled by it. It's in this form. It's just like if you were trying to, herd your sheep with a fire hose. You can't aim it that. It would have you'd spray the hose and then the ground is wet. You couldn't not wet the ground. And that's the thing about money, you can't, and now I see there are people who, they get as far as saying, okay, so if interest rates go up, these bonds are worth less. If you sell the bonds, they're worth less. But they can't, they only take that as like a magic, it's so naturalized. They don't realize that the ruling class has been always saying to itself, well, how can we get into a situation where we can do this thing that we want, say raise interest rates, and this doesn't happen with the bonds? And of course this is what, Keynes spent his life trying to figure out various little other things you can do, complicate you can complicate the policy in order to counteract necessary fallout from an action in monetary policy. But of course, you solve the whole problem if you don't have any monetary policy because you don't have any money and you're just the emperors, like the ruling class on their plantations, like Plato's Republic, living their wonderful life with slaves that they completely control. And there aren't any of these complexities about the falling rate of profit or, the portfolio or the market. So all this stuff it's the friend of the ruling class when that's its only option. And then it's gotten to a point where it's so powerful that this is now the enemy. This is the thing to be cleared away. So what they have to clear away now, what they're really aiming at is getting rid of the money. And if you read the Omarova paper, you see what the next stage is, which would be an enormous advance. It would basically be really the end of money, the first stage of it, but then they'd have to work out the details for the next, and they can't just snap their fingers and do it because the consequences would be to themselves. And I was listening to my hate watch the other day, my hate listen, and these are grown men talking to each other, and they say, if we gave everyone $1 billion, then the sanitation engineer would be the most important person. I mean, this is a verbatim quote. And then I thought, what are they thinking? If we who gave everyone $1 billion? Like for them, that would mean would have the purchasing power of $1 billion before they gave it to everyone. Where, I don't know. But they have no idea that what they're describing is a sort of babyish way of describing hyperinflation. But they don't even know, they don't realize that what they're saying is, baby talk, nonsense. It doesn't, but it gives you a glimpse of how there's no conception at all of what money is. And these are people they're saying this in the course of what they think is their online Marxist university. So what is money? So the next thing, so Vighi that's the audience that Vighi is really for. And so why am I here trying to rebut it? Because, those people are hopeless, but they cause a disruption. I think what I want to do is for us to, all of us who, because Vighi isn't the only one. There are many, every little environment has a Vighi. I was talking to someone who's in Belgrade saying, each environment has someone trying to run this kind of mystification. And, we all know what's wrong with it, but to say it out loud, I hope will make our ability to ignore it stronger. Anyway, there'll be one more part.